Good afternoon, my name is Ross Galata. I work at Covance. I'm the vice president in our food solutions business. I've also been on the board for 5 years and been treasurer of the organization for the last 3. So I don't know about you, but I've been really excited about the discussions we've had today and the conversations, both formal and informal, about the great things that are happening in the biohealth industry across the country, but really right here in Wisconsin, which really gets me pretty energized. And we're going to continue that conversation with a pharma panel, and the topic is how patient-centered care is driving change and creating and propelling opportunities. So I have the pleasure of introducing Erik Floyd, who is going to be leading the panel discussion. Erik's from Dohmen Life Sciences, and with that, I'll have Erik come out and the panel come out, and we'll begin. So with that, Erik.
So, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to take a little different spin and wake you up, because I know there's quite a few of you all are in postprandial spikes and getting a little bit sleepy. So we're going to liven this up a little bit. Would like to thank you and thank my colleagues and guests for participating on this panel. The topic of the panel for discussion today is how patient-centered care is driving change and propelling opportunity. And what we would like to do is focus on leveraging the expertise of the panel within the pharmaceutical arena to really understand how empowering the patients, specifically targeted within specific disease areas, and how drug development and commercialization can actually facilitate patient care and patient support. So I'd just like to start out, could you just give a quick brief introduction of your name, background?
Sure. Dan Brennan. I've been in pharmaceuticals for about 18 years, 10 years at Eli Lilly, sales and marketing, another couple of years running acute care hospital business at Abbott. Worked in orphan drugs and rare drugs at Lundbeck. Had 4 different products that were in our business unit, and I ran all the sales and marketing and the interaction with the patient advocacy groups for those 4 different products. Became COO of a small company called Therapeutics, and now I'm officially in between jobs. On my way to the next.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Tim Cunniff. I head up the research and development group for Marathon Pharmaceuticals in Chicago. I've been in industry for about 30 years now. First half of my career in big pharma, at primarily Park Davis, Pfizer, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm a Michigan grad, so go blue. Good game against Wisconsin.
It's not a good place to sit.
And then
That'll wake them up.
that's the wake you guys up. Last 15 years in rare diseases, primarily at Ovation Lundbeck, where I work with these gentlemen here on the stage. And we have at Marathon now, we have a drug up for FDA review in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I know that's a really hot area right now with the recent approval of Sarepta's exons here.
And I'm Erik Eglite. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry about 14 years. This is my 3rd startup company with Tim at Marathon. I also was Chief Compliance Officer and Corporate Counsel at Lundbeck, and I'm in the midst of my 11th launch. I know at Ovation Lundbeck we launched a drug just about every single year, so we get a lot of experience. None of our drugs were easy. I just wish we had a blockbuster antibiotic once in a while, but it seems like every one of our drugs is specialty pharmacy distribution, serious REMS, serious issues with all our drugs and things we have to deal with, so excited to be here.
Excellent. And my name is Erik Floyd. I've spent approximately 19 years in the pharmaceutical industry. I'm president of compliance services and chief scientific officer for Dohmen Life Sciences. I joined Dohmen because of its real focus on the patient, particularly in rare and orphan disease. And I think it is an excellent opportunity to look at how we translate what we do within drug development to really deliver high-touch services for the patient, to give them a full wraparound ancillary service. And so it really is a true bench-to-bedside experience that we try to provide for the patient. Okay, let me start you guys out with a softball question. Okay, in last year in 2015, 40% of the drugs that were approved by the FDA were orphan drugs. And it's anticipated that that will only increase with the coming years. And I'd like to hear from you your unique experiences in dealing specifically with rare and orphan drugs, and how you partner with the patient community and the caregivers to really bring insight to the agency on how to address unmet medical need.
Well, I can start out. So last year, when I was at Lumbeck and in charge of 4 products, 2 of them were epilepsy products for rare diseases within epilepsy. And we partnered very strongly with the Epilepsy Foundation and especially their local chapters to get with caregivers. And I'm glad that you even snuck in the word caregivers, because a lot of patient-centered care, especially in orphan diseases that I'm used to, there's a caregiver that is driving many, if not most, of the decision-making and education and learning and advocacy on behalf of the patient. And so we work with the Epilepsy Foundation and the caregivers to go to walkathons and bowl-a-thons and dance-a-thons and support the community. But by doing that, and not only did they see us there, but we learned a lot, and our sales representatives, as well as some of the people from the home office, would learn the language, what to say, what not to say, what their biggest issues and challenges and problems are. And then we could bring that back into our clinical group for clinical trial design. But also we brought that into our development of new materials for marketing and sales materials so that we could be more relevant when we're out there with the physicians. And so it's just nice to be able to work with tight-knit communities that are so involved in their own care, or as I mentioned before, if they're a caregiver for their loved one, because they're very interested and open to share what they need, what they want, and what they need from us.
I think it's very good points, Dan. I think in our experience in working with the Duchenne communities, number one, it's a very, very small group. There's only about 15,000 boys with the disease in the U.S., but there's surprisingly a lot of advocacy groups. There's about 3 very large organizations, and then there's probably about 5 to 10 other smaller organizations, and they all serve a particular need in the community. And so though while drug development takes a little bit longer with some of these orphan diseases, I think it's much more efficient because we're studying the disease. We know a lot more about the disease. We know how to reach the patients more effectively because we're working with the advocacy groups very closely, and they're helping us to identify the patients. The patients actually have the conditions. Oftentimes when you're dealing with diseases such as depression and anxiety, you're not really sure that you're studying patients who actually have the condition. We're also working, because we're meeting with the advocacy groups and we're meeting with some of our peer companies, we're able to network with the companies and share intelligence. We're sharing data with Eli Lilly and Pfizer and BMS and other companies right now that is making us more efficient. It's a two-way street. They have data that we need, and we have data that they need, and that's making us much more efficient in the drug development process. And so when we have a rare disease like this, you're not so much a competitor. Everyone is pulling in the directions to solve some of these awful conditions, and so I think we're much more efficient in drug development.
And also to what Dan was saying, I know when we launched a number of drugs, we had brought in some patients, and I know when they spoke to the sales force is just thinking, I'm going to launch this drug. But when you bring in a patient that actually suffers from the disease or cares for a child that has epileptic seizures every 30 seconds, it's so impactful and resonates to the audience, to the reps. We'll also translate that to physicians who don't always know what's going on at the home. I know that physicians have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to see a patient. They got the chart, they go in there, how you doing, they look at the labs and they move on. Duchenne's, for instance, I don't think physicians are aware of the difficulty the mothers, in this disease state, mothers are the caregivers, and we didn't know this, but men leave their wives because they're overwhelmed with the child's disease and all that goes with it. And we may do some speaker programs, commercial speaker programs, or we may have some testimony from patients on what life is like. And I think it is important that doctors hear it. They don't know. It's all clinical to them. And it's important we make these relations and we learn so much from patients. So.
Well, and we even went a step beyond that. We had a drug for Huntington's disease and hired a couple of people as sales representatives, one that had Huntington's disease herself, so she was tested. She tested positive. She was not symptomatic, but she was very much, aware of what this was very much, engaged in making something positive happen about it. And she was a fantastic person. She taught us. She got out in the field. She helped others. And then we hired another guy whose mom had just died of Huntington's disease. And again, being able to hear from people like that and the commitment that they show, the learning is fantastic. And to me, that's part of being involved with patient advocacy or patient community groups is taking that all on and having a hands-on approach.
So, and Tim, specific for you, because I've had very similar experiences, how have you leveraged that advocacy in reference to engaging and influencing the FDA, the EMA, or the actual committee members that really have not seen the face of the patient when they're looking at reviewing, adjudicating, and making the decision on the approvability of a product that can address an unmet medical need?
Sure. So with the Sarepta experience, I think about 10 days ago now, the FDA approved the exon 51 skipper from Sarepta. And if you haven't read that approval document, I urge you to go online on FDA.gov and read it. Now, it was an extraordinary approval, and essentially it came down to one person at FDA, Dr. Woodcock, the director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, who approved that drug. As part of the whole now, the Congress, and when they passed PDUFA-5, they really wanted the patient's voice to be heard. And surprisingly, if you read the reviews by the Division of Neurology Drugs, they felt that the advocacy groups were intimidating. And that's not been my experience with the advocacy groups. There's a number of them. One of them is a little bit more militant than the others. But even that group I don't find intimidating at all. They have agenda. They have boys that are dying before their eyes. They are pushing for approvals. There's not been a drug approved. Up until recently, there hasn't been drugs being developed for this condition. So obviously they are pushing for drugs to be developed and drugs to be approved. But I haven't found that experience to be intimidating at all.
They're certainly zealous.
Yeah.
Yes. But they're advocates, that's what they are. And if it's your kid, they're going to go out there and say everything they can. It's still the government should. Statutory laws.
They're playing their role. In sessions before committees in Congress, I do think they're a little bit harsh with the FDA. I think there needs to be some education on sort of the overarching, legal structure that the FDA is bound to approve drugs in. But that having said, I've not found them to be intimidating. Ultimately, the approval came down to Dr. Woodcock approving that drug. So the advocacy groups, I think, were quite effective because all they needed was one person to approve this drug at FDA, and they got it. And I think the level of evidence when you review sort of the approved label for that drug, and you will go through and approve, look at the level of evidence. It's 12 patients. It's pretty scant, and so I think in this situation, the advocacy won the day for this drug approval. So in this particular condition, obviously a life-threatening rare disease. And this is, the exon skipper only treats about 10 to 13% of this very rare disease that these patients that have the mutation, so it's an ultra-orphan condition. So in this particular condition, the advocacy groups, I think, got the approval for the company. So it was extremely effective.
So, in looking at drug development for orphan and rare disease drugs and how companies are focusing on even more targeted therapies, it means that we're actually targeting smaller and smaller patient populations for clinical trials. How does the size of the patient population impact your ability to approach the clinical development? because it is extremely difficult to find a needle in the haystack. What techniques or tools have you used in addressing the challenges of patient recruitment? What impact has that had on the delay? As you know, in the pharmaceutical industry, we're constantly under pressure to meet time frames for development. I'd like to hear your perspectives on that.
Well, I think first and foremost, it forces you to be a global company. You can't just limit your clinical trials to the U.S. Because to find patients, you have to go sort of outside, and you have to have the infrastructure, you have to have the expertise, and if you don't have the expertise, you have to have the ability to hire CROs and CMOs and people that have that expertise to help you do clinical trials in other countries, whether that's Europe, Latin America, Asia. You have to have that ability to do that. And that's not just the ability to do clinical trials there, it's the having the safety infrastructure, it's having the manufacturing infrastructure, understanding how to release drugs from a quality perspective. So it's having that ability as well. It also sort of raises sort of ethical issues too. If you're looking at the Declaration of Helsinki, obviously you have open label extensions. If you're working in rare diseases, once the trial is done, you just can't pull therapy away, effective therapy away from patients who respond to your drug. So you have to have open label extensions. Not only here, you have to offer it in other countries. And to our way of thinking too, if you're going to do clinical studies in other countries, then you really have the obligation to register that drug in those countries as well. Because the Declaration of Helsinki says when you conduct research, it has to benefit the patient, but it also has to benefit the society and where you're doing research as well. So you have to have the ability, especially if you're a small country, to be able to register that drug in that country or to find a partner then to register the drug on your behalf as well. So that's always been our philosophy as well as a small company, that if you're going to go and you conduct a trial in Brazil, the end game then is then you have to be able to register ultimately that drug in Brazil as well. So that's just something that you need to also take into consideration to have that global mindset.
I've never been asked as much in the last 3 or 4 years to be involved in marketing for a clinical trial as I have in the entire 18 years that I've been in commercial in pharmaceuticals. So more and more, the tools that all of us get targeted on whenever we log onto our computer and find that somebody's advertising to you on something that you had just asked a question about the day before. A lot of those techniques on remarketing and targeted marketing work very nicely to help find those needle in the haystack patients that you would want to get enrolled into your studies so that you can hurry up and get that study enrolled and completed. So that's definitely one area that has been used a lot, but also we do good old-fashioned radio ads too for clinical studies and trials that are effective, and we have a lot of data on that too. And so that's probably less effective on a rare disease than the digital, but still used and useful. But the other end again is, and I keep talking about these patient advocacy groups, that they are very, very helpful in recruiting. And they know who all the patients and the caregivers are. They know them by first name. They each have networks both nationally and locally, and it's they're more and more involved. Advocacy groups are creating their own registries, and it's to collect information about the disease and symptoms and such. But quite honestly, they know that they have designed that so that when the next clinical trial comes along, bam, they've got the names and numbers and information of all these different potentially qualified patients that they work with either their network or the sponsoring company to help quicken the recruiting process.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. So let's talk about launch strategies and commercialization. I know that's at the key of your heart. And we know that everything in reference to a therapy is contingent upon adherence and compliance. And I work for a company, Dohmen, that truly focuses on emphasizing and looking at the patient journey to be able to facilitate that successful patient journey for compliance. What tools have you implemented in partnering with the patient and the caregivers to enhance that support for the patient as they go through this journey? As you know, in rare and orphan patient populations, the products are very unique. They are specifically addressing an unmet need. Most of the time, they are first in class because no one else is addressing that unmet need. And there is a very high cost aligned with that product. And so if patients are paying that level for service, what are those ancillary services that you guys look to provide?
There's a number of them, and I would work oftentimes with this regulatory and compliance guide to put them into place so that we did them right, but it starts with copay cards and paying down copay. That keeps people compliant because a lot of times you get sticker shock when the payer slaps a $500 copay on you. But so copay cards, free initial starter drug many times. Patients are so eager and they've tried so many other things that haven't worked. And to find out that it's going to take a week before the insurance company is going to determine whether or not you have been approved, you just send out free drug to get them going. You help them with the call center to fight through the maze of questions and problems and blocks that payers put in place. And you're able to do this on behalf of the patient and help them through the maze of those challenges. And one thing that I've found that's the most eye-opening, beneficial support program for patients to help them through their experience with a medicine is a nurse calling them after the prescription and for probably once a week for the next 3 weeks. We've set up this program in a number of different products and categories, and when you get reports back from these nurses that talk to the patients on, oh my gosh, you will never believe what we learned today. And it's either that they never picked up the drug or it never showed up on their door, it went to their neighbor's door or something, and I didn't know that it was supposed to come, and you uncovered distribution problems. Instructions for use. Titration. Titration is a word that most patients have no idea what it means. And when a nurse is actually talking to them and saying, hey, but didn't your physician tell you about this titration? And they're kind of like, yeah, I didn't really understand what that meant. And so, again, we would have daily meetings getting reports back from the nurses talking about their experience with patients that had just been prescribed the drug, and it was eye-opening to all of us that hadn't gone through this before, and you just don't know what you don't know until you actually put in a program like that. And we've saved patients from going off and getting dosed incorrectly to getting back to their office, to the nurses and physicians, and clarifying questions and problems, to these distribution issues, but very helpful.
So this is where it does get dicey for the legal guys. Because these drugs are expensive, because only 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people in the country take it, obviously they can't sell it at a brick and mortar Walgreens or CVS. We have a specialty pharmacy distribution, high cost. There's a target on your back just because of that, whether it's politically motivated or whether it's Department of Justice or OIG. We design these programs very carefully. The OIG puts out guidances on how you should design these programs, and we don't want to have patient beneficiary inducement laws. You don't want to go too far with helping patients. I'll take it to an extreme. What if we offered services that we did their taxes? Way too far, that would be considered a kickback. The nursing services we provide are minimal. Obviously, we don't want to give medical advice. If I have a nurse that opines, well, you're fine, and a drug can cause suicidality, and a patient goes out and kills themselves, well, then our company is suddenly liable and enthralled in a product liability or medical malpractice lawsuit. So these programs are complicated, they're very difficult to run and manage, and they're very costly. I'm going to give a plug to Erik. I know their company helps in this regard. A number of law firms do as well, and consulting firms, and I have always found their guidance very helpful. Their abilities to run specialty pharmacies is very helpful as well. So with all the activities we do, all of it makes you sweat, certainly the lawyers, but we design this very carefully, and we have to. So.
So let's get to a hot topic, and I'm sure everyone has heard about this. This is very controversial. So, what are some of the misconceptions or the reality of purpose that you would like to share with the general public that you could correct in reference to numbers or misnomers? And I'm specifically referencing the scenario around the pricing of EpiPen and the feedback that the pharmaceutical companies get in reference to pricing and pricing escalation.
Well, I'm a dad of a kid that takes the EpiPen. I'm also a father who's going to pay for her college, and I've worked for 3 startup companies, and we've had a lot of high-priced drugs. I have often said this, that Mozart died at 35. If he only had some damn penicillin, we'd have 35 more years of Mozart's music. We offer wonderful products to the world, and I hate to say it, but people do things either for gold or for glory, and or both. Many college professors typically did it for glory. They wanted a Nobel Prize, they want to get tenure. And then there's the capitalist out there who does it for money and some glory as well. Greed spurs innovation, and people go out there and do things, and they create, they develop, they make these fantastic companies, and all of society benefits. Hatch-Waxman Act has said that. They encourage that, right? They want to give you an exclusive right, a patent, for a limited period of time, and when that period of time is over, the world will own your patent. So, we all benefit from that, of course. So, I won't speak directly to any drug pricing, certainly from my company, but I think just in a general sense, it's always been my philosophy that wonderful things have come from these companies, and somebody's greed, I hate to say it. So.
I think you need to distinguish between sort of real research and development when you're developing new products, and you do have a limited patent life or a limited exclusivity life, and where you're investing in that sort of development program for rare disease or any sort of disease, versus something like EpiPen or what Martin Shkreli did, where you're just grabbing an old product and jacking price. I think those are very different situations where you're not investing in the product, or you're not making sort of benefit or investment in the product of bringing it to market. So I think those are sort of 2 very different discussions, and I think some of those actions are giving sort of the rare disease drug developers a black eye, and I think that's sort of the message that when I go to the Hill, those are what I'm talking to Congress about, where initially they weren't making the distinction, and I think sort of now people are understanding, at least from a political perspective, what some of the people are when they're taking another drug and not making investments and taking pricing actions. That's very different than new drug development. And I think that's what people need to make a distinction.
Yeah, it's frustrating to see the people that are giving the industry a black eye by just taking an old product and jacking up the price, versus Gilead with Sovaldi with a phenomenal innovation that practically cures Hep C, and yet gets dragged out for being really expensive. I don't see that as being expensive for a cure that's innovative, and the company had to put a lot of risks on the line as far as capital is concerned early on. And as I'm now in between my jobs, and one of the things I'm looking at doing is starting up a pharma company and looking to raise money. And I realize how difficult it is to raise money, because there's an easy opportunity for whatever it is we come up with to just go, to zero. And yet these people are investing $20, $30, $40 million into this idea of a drug development program. Well, that's expensive. And those people that are putting up the money for that innovation should get rewarded with some type of a profit that allows them to do it over again. So this is probably more of a political discussion than it is a drug development one. But
Just the season.
Yes, right on time. So can you talk or speak to the audience about any relevant technologies in reference to capturing information from a patient, either emotional or medical or treatment journeys as the patient goes through, their journey of care? Any technologies that come to mind that actually empowers the patient?
Well, when I was at Runbeck, and we had launched a drug in Parkinson's disease, and there were a couple of thought leaders working on telemedicine for Parkinson's that was absolutely phenomenal. He was talking to and set up a program and a clinical study with nursing homes that were out completely rural and wouldn't normally have access to clinical trials, and set up a program, and he measured not only could he check their visual motion and activity just through the screen, but then they also had the technological hookup for blood pressure and heart rate and such. And the amount of info that he could get for a workup for whether or not the person could be enrolled in a clinical trial and did a normal, just a normal exam was fantastic. And the results back, one of the things that they measured was just simple patient satisfaction. And the patient satisfaction was through the roof, to the point where many of these patients were complaining that this study was over and that they couldn't continue to see him over their telehealth approach. So I think that it's obvious that this is something, and this was 5 years ago. I'm very surprised and a bit dismayed that this hasn't caught on more. And I think to some extent it has to do with reimbursements and licensing and such, but this is something that can help in clinical trials, it can help in regular exams and follow-up from procedures as well as a new medicine start. That's pretty straightforward and should be working well.
We're actually evaluating those types of tools now in some of our phase 3 and 4 trials. Because the Duchenne patients, especially those who have lost ambulation, one of our trials is dedicated to those who have lost ambulation. It's very hard for them and their caregivers and their mothers and fathers to get them in the clinic. So that we're actually looking at some of those telehealth things. And
the pain involved for people to go into the office for an exam, but in these clinical trials too, just to get them there is difficult. And that was, again, the interesting thing for me in looking at this Parkinson's particular case is that these nursing homes, they would have to get extra staff and support to put people into vans, to bring them down to their exams, and the amount of money that this saved overall. But their care was actually not only good, but the patient satisfaction was higher. It just tells me that has to be the way that things go.
the problem is some of the validation that it requires for registration is pretty high. But these are going to be just publication studies, so I think we're going to move in that direction.
So, audience, I'd like to hear from you. Do you guys have any questions for this brain trust I have on the bench? Silence. Not do that. All right, let me keep asking questions.
Anyone want to pick on Tim and Michigan?
So, what have you seen in reference to your drug development and even post-launch in reference to patient adherence? It's one thing to be able to engage and capture a patient. It's something very different to be able to retain and keep a patient in reference to compliance, to be able to manage their disease. What tools do you implement for enhancing patient retention?
It's not easy, and to some extent, part of adherence is, the drug's either going to work or it's not going to work, and it's hard to tell whether, okay, this patient didn't adhere to therapy because of something, odd and silly, that they forgot, or that they just kind of lost track, or they don't understand what to look for as far as drug results, or it really just isn't working and they're on to the next. But in a lot of these, as Erik mentioned before, in a lot of the rare and orphan diseases, we have the ability with our specialty pharmacy distribution to have data down to the patient level to really understand how long are they staying on, and all of a sudden you have some they look like Kaplan-Meier curves as far as, on average, where are patients, how long are they staying on, when are they dropping off? And mathematically, we can look at, and in some cases, we say, wow, look at that 3 month. At 3 months, something's happening where we're seeing a 20% drop just at 3 months. Why is that? Is there some program that the payer is putting in place that after 3 months there's a new copay, or is it something that has to do with, our program from the specialty pharmacy, the nurse stops calling at 3 months. Oh my gosh, okay, well let's extend that and at least put it through 4 months and see if that moves the curve in a different way. And in some cases, it's just somebody calling and reminding them, how things going. And we'd find that by doing some of these trials with the data that we have, as well as some interventions that hopefully help patients to remember to take their medicines. But it's amazing. And diabetes, patients with insulin have poor compliance and adherence. So it's a challenge that's it's multifactorial.
It's hard for us to interfere, of course, legally with patient-doctor relationships. The thing we can do is educate doctors. One interesting thing we have is a CYP2D testing thing. We noticed that patients were fast metabolizers. They had an enzyme, they were fast metabolizers with our drug. I think you discovered it through these specialty pharmacy hubs, and our clinicians and regulatory people got together, and we recognized this and then worked with the FDA and had an educational initiative to tell doctors, by the way, your patient should be tested for CYP2D6. They may be a fast metabolizer of the drug. That's why it's not effective. Sure enough, we put patients on a higher dose because that was medically indicated, a response, and better compliance because the thing works. So, but to the crux, we of course also have to be careful. Patient compliance is out of our realm in many ways as well. We can track information and then react to it appropriately with physicians with appropriate education.
Well, in the one program that we had, we received a signature from patients saying, we are okay with you and your nurse and your program and calling us and sharing information about our care and education about our care. And
very much. The HIPAA language was through and through, very clear.
So with our drug for Duchenne, we actually have an expanded access program going on in Dohmen's, our specialty pharmacy, and we're approaching about 500 patients right now. So when we met with FDA at the pre-NDA meeting, we got the FDA's permission to expand access to treat patients in an open label fashion free of charge while we were putting the NDA together and while the FDA was reviewing it given the unmet need. And so our PDUFA date's in February, so we already have about 500 patients on therapy, so it's a real good opportunity to look at that data. And so while when we launched the drug in February, we already have a good idea of maybe where some of the pitfalls are going to be. And so dropout rate is actually pretty low, but we meet with advocacy quite frequently, and we're looking at the data, and dropouts have been due to weight gain, some psychiatric events, and so when we meet with the various advocacy groups, one of the groups, Cure Duchenne, is looking at the weight gain, and they want to work with us on doing a glucocorticoid diet. So they want to work with a bunch of endocrinologists and nutritionists to put out a very specific, what sort of diet should you be on when you're taking glucocorticoids. So we're working with that advocacy group that upon launch in February, we'll have a specific diet in place with nutritionists that the specialty pharmacy can send out when you do send out the prescription. So that could mitigate some of the weight gain we're seeing with the glucocorticoids. And then we're dealing with another group, Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. They're looking at it and they're seeing some of the psychiatric events. And so could there be an opportunity to do a small pilot study with some of the key opinion leaders, with various psychiatric agents, can we mitigate some of those? So we can do some investigator-sponsored research around some of those events and see if that maybe we can bring down some of those rates, and that could increase compliance as well. So, those are some of the things that we're working on with the advocacy partners and some of the early peaks we're getting at with the data to improve compliance.
Erik, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm just curious, I don't know if you guys can hear me here or not. Beyond the therapy, during the keynote, Mark discussed how it's important to go beyond just the therapy itself. So bundling services, what does it look like? I have a technology background, so I'm curious to hear your insights on, what are you doing, or what are you seeing, what trends are you seeing that go beyond just the therapy in terms of bundling services, or even including technology? mobile application software? Maybe it's internal, maybe it's direct to patient.
So I can speak from the experience of the patient journey for clients that we supported Dohmen. And what we see is the patients and the caregivers are really looking for more information, more input, more feedback, more engagement, more support. Something as simple as a phone call once a week from our patient services coordinator just to check in on the patient. The nursing support that we provide, actually delivering the drug product to the patient for infusion. It's the soft touch, emotional relationship to know that you have that level of support and care there that is outside of something going to a Walgreens and picking up a prescription. Particularly when you're in an arena where there really is nothing available and you're looking for people like you that have similar maladies, to know that you're part of a group and a network that has that level of support really provides the foundation and the girder for the patient.
Sure. And I apologize, I don't know your name, gentleman on the left.
Dan?
Dan, thank you. Sorry about that. So Dan, you had cited that, part of your engagement, the advocacy groups, you're really collecting, really valuable insights from those conversations as you sponsor events and other things like that. I'm curious, that's what I'm thinking, but just generally, are you hearing or are you learning about trends in terms of what are patients asking for? Whether that's a digital solution or services that you're like, wow, it's really simple, it's really innovative, whatever.
Yeah, a lot of times what they're asking for, just straight out consciously, is more information and education about the disease, and perhaps a lot you'd hear about diagnosis. They will talk about the journey that they've had, either themselves or their family member, and how long it took to get finally diagnosed with this rare disease. And so we've created patient advisory boards. In some cases, there were people that ran the Epilepsy Foundation or the local chapters, but also with real patients and their families. And we would dig down into that, and we'd find out that, they would love to be able to help us share so that the next person with this bad disease doesn't have to go through what they went through. And so a lot of our programs, both on web pages, but also in some cases developing apps and trying to get physicians to hand out these apps to patients that come into the offices. And we're moderately successful on some of these, but it's driven from what we've heard of the issues and the challenges that they bring up. The one that I'm most proud about is when we were at Lundbeck together, and this was the three of us, you left by then, we sponsored for the Epilepsy Foundation what started out as being 4 different cities. We sponsored art therapy sessions. Had nothing to do with our drug or our medicine at all. But what we had heard is that many of these kids with epilepsy and adults had a problem socializing and talking about what epilepsy meant to them. And there was a pilot program at, I think it was the Chicago chapter, where they had great results on one 6-week program, art therapy, where 12 people came together and they do art, and the licensed art therapists were able to talk about their disease, and it was phenomenal. We started it out in 4 cities, and our sales representatives got involved, and they helped recruit the different patients in. And the result back were people saying that my son or daughter, this is the first time that they've ever had friends. And they came back and they were so excited and confident, and they shared for the first time their picture and how it affected them. And so we start getting these results in, and by the end of the 3rd year, I think we were in 50 cities sponsoring a 6 to 8 week program for people with epilepsy to go in there. And it was the most exciting thing for people in our company and for what the Epilepsy Foundation saw about what we did and cared. And we were recruiting, and we would have sales reps going with their 18-year-old son who was trying to learn about and potentially being interested in getting into medicine. And all these things I think are important, and we started calling it trying to transform and help the community. And when you get involved and you help the community by doing things that are non-drug related, it's good for everyone.
Sure.
And the learning that goes on so that we can learn about, well, what else are you having problems and challenges with? And we, you know, just to tie that last bit up, we sponsored at the very end of that research on these art therapy sessions and found out that there was statistical significant increase in the self-esteem of the people that got involved in the program. Again, we didn't have to do that, but I'll tell you what, it helped everyone. It helped our sales reps understand more about the disease. It helped our reputation. It helped us understand as an organization more about the disease and feel better about what we're doing. And so I think in rare diseases in these tight communities, doing things like that works for everyone, and it wins, and it gives us ideas on the commercial side on more things that we can do to become and remain relevant in physicians' offices, in the patient communities, when we're at the walkathons, and the types of information that we're handing out. I don't know if that gets to your...
No, that's great, thanks.
It's just a quick question for one of the marathon folks. I walked in a couple minutes late, so you may have already mentioned this, but my understanding is that you all are working to get a treatment approved for DMD patients in the U.S. So can you just say where you are in that process currently, and what the approval of Sarepta's drug announced last week, how that affects things?
Sure. So we submitted the NDA in June. The FDA filed it in August. They gave us a priority review. So our PDUFA date is February. We're having our mid-cycle review meeting with the FDA next week. They said it'll be very short. There's been no issues that have popped up so far during the review, so we expect it'll be a very smooth FDA review. They've already told us there'll be no advisory committee, so that's always a good sign. So we expect the PDUFA date February should probably be an approval, knock on wood. Sarepta's approval has no bearing on us. We're not competitors. Everyone in Sarepta's program has used the steroid. Of their 12 patients, 9 were on our drug, 3 were on prednisone. And so we expect to be standard of care. Sarepta's approval is limited to those with an exon 51 mutation, so only about 13% of boys with Duchenne. Our indication will be more broad. We can be used with everyone with Duchenne. We have very good relations with Sarepta. We work collaboratively with them, so I think we probably will do a lot of education and partnership with them, so I think it will be good for the entire community.
Back to your tough questions, Erik.
Back to the tough questions. I just wanted to follow up on that gentleman's question in reference to technology. I think the evolving technology, wearable devices, information data capture, applications that can be deployed to actually data capture from the patient, from the caregiver, from the nurse, from the physician in real-time telemedicine is really going to advance our ability to move through the drug approval and review cycle. Now, with all that being said, there's a high level of scrutiny in reference to compliance and confidentiality of patient data under HIPAA. And my colleague here can speak more about that. But I think the more information that we can gather by any tools or technology to be able to deliver patient care can only help.
It should matter. Again, I've been on the commercial side, and I've been very excited about the opportunities within digital, taking apps and communicating back and forth and relationship. It really, and maybe my team and I just aren't adept at it, but we haven't really figured out the way to make apps and things like that helpful or successful for both patients as well as...
Well, I have a company, Red Arrow Technologies, under Dohmen.
All right.
That's exactly what
Well, maybe they've cracked the code. I still haven't seen it. It seems like a lot of money. It's flashy. It's exciting. You win awards, but nobody uses it.
Yeah. Well, we've got some technology for you.
All right.
Is this a setup?
Shameless plug.
I just got to call. Somebody can be calling on me on the...
Sure. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.